I was having a fascinating talk a few minutes ago with someone, and we were trying to work out why can Russia not negotiate peace with Ukraine if Russia is struggling so hard and if Russia's money is running out. Well, Russia today finds itself in a paradox of its own propaganda. For 3 years, the Kremlin has told its citizens that it's winning in Ukraine. State television repeats the mantra, Ukraine is collapsing, NATO is divided, Russia is strong, yet the reality is the reverse. Russia is running out of money, morale and mission. The war has become a vast meat grinder, chewing up men for no purpose, beyond Vladimir Putin's ego. So why not sue for peace? Because admitting failure would mean the destruction of the power base in the Kremlin itself. For Putin and his cronies, assuming Putin is still alive, defeat is not simply military, it is existential. They have promised the Russian people not only victory but national rebirth, the restoration of empire, Novorussia. To back down would be to admit that thousands died in vain, that Russia remains weaker than the West, and that Putin's messianic project has failed. Such an admission would shatter the carefully constructed edifice of fear and obedience upon which his regime rests. At the recent Alaska summit, the big, beautiful summit that could have been an email, the world saw the contradiction exposed. The red carpet treatment given to Putin allowed him to claim on Russian television that he had ended the nation's diplomatic isolation, yet on the battlefield Ukraine continues to engineer inspired attacks, blowing up oil refineries in Rostov, striking GRU bases in Crimea, and forcing Russian soldiers into futile assaults where the casualty ratio runs 7-1 in Ukraine's favour. In this light, the summit was theatre, optics for a Russia that cannot afford reality. Of course, Russia won't know about a lot of the attacks because Rostov, for example, has no Wi-Fi, has no internet connection. The domestic cost of continuing the war is enormous. A third of the federal budget is now consumed by defence spending, 13 trillion rubles this year, the highest military burden since the Cold War. The occupied territories, meanwhile, are fiscal sinkholes. The Crimea, still relies on subsidies for more than half its budget. Donetsk and Kherson drain even more. Russian taxpayers, already battered by inflation and shortages, must fund stagnant regions that return little but resentment. Victory looks less like triumph and more like endless, costly babysitting of ruins. Nor is the Kremlin unified. The war has created a new class of profiteers, arms manufacturers, corrupt officers, skimming soldiers' pay, oligarchs who snapped up Western assets at knockdown prices. These men will resist peace as fiercely as any general because war is now their business model. And so the Russian state eats itself, enriching insiders like while impoverishing the nation. Still, the propaganda machine insists on victories. Moscow can rebrand almost everything. A withdrawal is a tactical regrouping. A summit photo op is proof of global respect. But the mask slips. The psychological toll of veterans returning home scarred and violent, the demographic collapse of young men killed or emigrated, and the corruption that pervades the armed forces are cracks that no slogan can conceal. For Putin, there's no exit. To capitulate is to risk a palace coup. To negotiate honestly is to expose the hollowness of his claims. Only the leader's funeral, an orderly transition to a new figurehead who can claim a fresh start, could plausibly allow Russia to change course without implosion. Until then, peace talks are shadows on a wall. And so Russia lashes out with missiles at Kyiv, with drones against apartment blocks in Kharkiv, with indiscriminate bombing that mirrors the desperation of Germany in 1945 or America in Vietnam. History shows that strategic air war on civilians seldom works. Instead of breaking morale, it steals it. Ukraine today is more unified than ever, its identity hardening under suffering, its population overwhelmingly determined to remain free. And the West must recognize that pattern. This is not about NATO expansion or security guarantees. It's about Russian imperialism, the centuries-long conviction that Ukraine cannot exist except as a dependency, and Putin didn't invent that imperial mindset. It invented him, and that is why even the most skillful negotiation is unlikely to succeed while he remains in power. In short, Russia cannot negotiate peace because the regime cannot survive peace. It can only survive by pretending victory, by continuing to spill blood until the lie becomes untenable. That is why Ukraine's strategy, active defense, creative counterstrikes, and refusal to concede territory is not just courageous but necessary. It ensures that the war remains Putin's war, his albatross. And the grim truth is this: as long as Putin lives politically, practically, Russia is trapped. The path to peace may not run through conferences or ceasefires, but through the inevitable collapse of a regime that has bound its fate to the illusion of Putinism. Until then, the world must resist the temptation of false settlements. Only Putin in the Smeg fridge is a possibility. Anything less than real accountability, than real frozen Putin, than real the absence of Putin, would not be peace, but only a pause before the next war.